welcome everyone to the Bible Feed podcast, to another episode, and we have something a little bit special for you with this episode. So, I'm Paul Davenport, and I'm here with Dan Weatherall. Now, there's nothing particularly unusual about me talking with Dan. We're often talking here about the Bible and faith in the modern world, and trying to understand the Bible better, just a couple of ordinary folk trying to understand the Bible better. But for this episode, we are really pleased to welcome some special guests, and we're really pleased to have with us today Dr. Dale Tuggy and Mark Cain. So welcome to you both.
Hey, thanks for having us. It's a real privilege.
Yes, thank you very much.
So, as our listeners will have deduced from your accents, you're not from these parts, from the UK, where Dan and I are from. You're joining us from the USA. So, whereabouts are you exactly?
Well, right now, I'm with Dale. My name is Mark, and I am in Tennessee with Dale. I normally live in Cleveland, Ohio, but I'm down in the area visiting, so we're actually able to do this interview, both of us together here.
Okay.
Coming to you from the South, home of good barbecue, fried chicken, and country music.
Fantastic. Yeah, Nashville. Is it Nashville?
Yeah, right above Nashville.
Yeah. Okay, country music. Only 3 chords, not 4. Fantastic.
You don't need the 4th.
It's really good to have you both on here. So it's a bit of a special edition of our podcast, partly because we've got you on here, but also because of what you're planning to do. You're planning a trip to the UK, and it's something to do with the UCA, which is what you're both heavily involved in. So maybe the first thing to do is if you can just explain what the UCA is and what your position is within it.
The UCA stands for Unitarian Christian Alliance, and it's an organization that Dale and I are both board members of. We started it around 2019, and it's been going for a few years. Its purpose is twofold. One is to produce resources that teach the one God and his human Messiah, and the other is to create a network of connectivity for people. Unfortunately, the tendency in the world today of Christianity is that folks who discover, from whatever means, that God is one and not a trinity, they end up feeling quite isolated because they don't know where they can attend. They can't find a church that teaches that God is one, and if they go to a church and then open their mouth, they may be asked to leave. So the unfortunate reality is that there's isolated people all around the world who are Unitarian Christians who cannot find fellowship that they're looking for. So we do both of those things with the one tool. It's a website that has a directory. You just create an account. It's free. And you put a spot on your zip code or your postal code, and then you can see, oh, there are other people not too far, and there's a tool to reach out and connect, and maybe you'll make a friend. Maybe you just end up having coffee once a month, or maybe a home Bible study forums. One of those things could happen. Or you may even discover that there's a group in that area, and you can now finally find fellowship.
That sounds great. And maybe right from the start, it's the Unitarian Christian Alliance, and
yes,
there's a distinction, isn't there, between the baggage that goes with that word Unitarian, as in Unitarian
yes.
Universalists. It's worth just making that up front. You're using it specifically in the sense of not a Trinitarian.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The Unitarian Universalists got it, the name, from back in a couple centuries ago, when they were actually Unitarian theologically. They believed that God was one person and not 3 persons. But through some liberal tendencies in their organization and a few generations passing, they became kind of what they are today.
Yeah, sure. But what the UCA is not a denomination at all, is it? You're not affiliated like that.
No. And we want to make room for people with different groups and some different convictions to have a third kind of place to get together. Yeah, to go back to the baggage of the U word, we're well aware of that, but by making Unitarian the adjective and Christian the noun, that kind of clarifies that we're not anywhere remotely near the UU sort of new religion.
Yeah, sure.
Where it's just a different kind of Christians.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what you're about, the UCA, and what are you doing in the UK this July?
Well, every year we've had, except for the first year because of COVID, we've had an annual event here in the States, and it's mostly a networking event and a paper presentation event. Some people think, like, is it a camp? Is it a church service? No, it's not. It's a chance for these people to meet. Many of these folks show up at the UCA conferences, and it's their first time to talk with and sit with and eat with other Unitarian Christians, and it's a super blessing to them. They get to meet people from multiple groups and organizations. There are several different groups that exist out in the world, Christadelphians being one of them, who are Unitarian in their theology. And it's just a chance, finally, for these folks to gather and discover and meet these people.
It's a bit like an academic conference. However, we space things out so there's lots of room for fellowship time. And then we have also running concurrent with some of the scholarly presentations. We have some practical workshops. So we're just trying to do different things to advance the movement in different ways.
This, I think, will be the first one that you've organized in the UK, and that will follow a similar kind of format, will
Yes.
it? With the academic content as well as the fellowship.
Yes, it starts on a Thursday night with a plenary session, everybody together. And then over the course of the next 2 days, there are 7 papers that are presented. And at the same time that the papers are presented, we also have the workshops. And then large gaps between. People can visit, talk, sit together, and make new friends. The reason we haven't had one in the UK is we haven't had a group of people yet with the time and the ability to get it organized until this year. There's a committee in the UK putting this together, which is made up of several Christadelphians and a couple who are more independent Unitarian Christians, and they've been working together actively to put this conference into place.
That's excellent. That's great to hear. So it's over, 3-4 days?
Yeah, from Thursday night to Saturday evening.
Cool. So it'd be great to hear what speakers and papers you've got lined up for this UK conference.
So the academic presentations are what we're going to talk about now, which is, of course, different than the practical workshops. I will be there talking about mainstream Christian theologies in the year 240. I'm going to focus on some historical figures, and my purpose in this is really to totally undermine the false narratives that are out there being propounded by Trinitarian apologists. You know, that everybody was always Trinitarian. They just didn't have enough language, or they were slightly confused. Yeah. We have a presentation called One God, One Lord, 1 Corinthians 8:6 by Jerry Wierwille. And that's pushing back on this idea that Paul in 1 Corinthians 8 somehow fits Jesus into the Shema or redefines the Shema or something like that.
The Shema being the Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one Lord. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and of course that verse famously talks about one God and one Lord, which is historically an absolute favorite Unitarian Christian verse, and the Trinitarians have tried to steal this and make it one of their favorites, but it doesn't work. The next presentation is one that I have to say I was told really impressed the paper committee. It's by Dan Weatherall. It's called It Wasn't God on the Cross. Excellent paper. I had a chance to read it, actually, and I agree. It's really top-notch.
Yeah, looking forward to give that. Should be good.
Yeah, we have Dr. Andrew Perryman from the London School of Theology, and we don't have his title yet. I suspect it's going to be about Philippians 2, which he's written a scholarly monograph on. Then we have Dr. Thomas Gaston from England. He's going to present on dynamic monarchianism, which is the topic of his excellent scholarly monograph that was published last year. These are basically what we now call biblical Unitarians, but we're talking about in the 100s and 200s AD. Then we have Dr. Dustin Smith, The Jewish Principle of Agency in the Gospel According to John, and Rohan Holt, who lives in America, although his accent gives him away as an Australian. And he has a very interesting presentation called Why Biblical Unitarianism Matters. And it's kind of inspired by missiology and people trying to spread the gospel. Interestingly enough, a lot of long-term Trinitarian missionaries have concluded, yeah, you need to really skip this whole deity of Christ and Trinity thing because it's obviously not essential, it's confusing, it's not clearly in the Bible. And he's going to come along as a Unitarian Christian and amen that.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, actually. Yeah. It's a little bit similar to what I'm going to say a little bit as well about how to articulate Christianity in a secular world. Actually, if you're trying to teach that God was on the cross in some way, it's really difficult concept and a completely unnecessary and unscriptural concept to try and talk about. So, yeah, that's good. Yeah. That sounds really good.
Yeah. Yep, although he's focusing on Muslim people and people from Africa.
Excellent.
So I think it'll be complementary.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So there's some real meaty content there in those. When you're using words like monarchianism, missiology, your everyday Christian, ordinary folk that we try and pretend to be, maybe struggle with things like that. So there's obviously a lot of content that you put on in this conference that isn't purely of that nature. You've got other activities and workshops. It'd be really good to just get a flavour of those things as well that involve words of less than 2 syllables.
Yeah, so we have some of the other things that are lined up. We will actually have a video recording running for the main presentations, the papers. Those get released online after they're edited and cleaned up, and they just become part of the UCA content that folks can find and watch over the coming years. For people who are at the event and who maybe are not interested in that particular presentation, they can go to these workshops, we call them. There's several things that are going to be for the kids, called Kids Club, so that if you did come with your kids, we have a few volunteers who are helping make that happen. A couple of the things that are also going to be under the workshops, I'll just read a few. When good arguments are not enough, getting under the skin of emotive arguments. And then there's a workshop on Iranian Unitarians called Giving Up Everything for Jesus. We have one for YouTube Made Easy, just being a practical tool for helping people do recording of YouTube videos, and another one about podcasts. So that's just an example of what we're doing with the workshops, so that folks who maybe aren't quite as theologically minded, or maybe they don't want to listen to papers, they just like to be active and meet folks. They just hang around in the workshops, they get to chat amongst themselves, and you get to know each other. And then at dinner, you sit with them and you ask them, about the things they're working on.
That sounds great. I mean, that's a great mixture.
We've been incredibly encouraged with just the friendships and even sometimes collaborations that have resulted from our conferences over here. So we're incredibly excited to see what this is going to do for folks in the UK. And about the scholarly presentations, we're able to be very picky, and we've picked really good presenters who will make it accessible, not just to the mega nerds, but just to the determined ordinary person who wants to be stretched a little bit.
The whole spectrum of content in the whole conference, isn't there? Right from quite challenging and really important scriptural and historical analysis, and then all the way through to having a meal with people, which is something that maybe Paul and I, we probably take for granted a bit. The church community, the fellowship, the time together, being able to just go around the UK and know that there are just so many Christadelphian churches full of believers there. And we meet up on Saturdays and have various events and choirs and all that sort of stuff. And we probably do just forget that for a lot of people that maybe are new to this idea or struggling with these doctrines and coming out of a Trinitarian view, they just haven't had that.
No, I have a similar background to you. I was raised in the Church of God General Conference. My dad was a pastor, so I was Unitarian Christian from the get-go, my entire life. And for the longest time, I was content and happy. I had a church fellowship. We had annual meetings. We had a youth camp that people came from all over the states to get together. It's easy to be happy when you have fellowship like you're describing. You just go someplace, you can meet up, and you can connect. And I never really seen the broader picture of people and the struggles that they had. And that's how I became connected with this. I went to, met with some people. We got to talking. There was a conference called Converge here in the United States, which was the first ever Unitarian Christian gathering. And it was amazing. I was meeting people from different backgrounds that I'd never seen and talking to them. And so the Unitarian Christian Alliance came out of that. And I was happy to get involved. I have the podcast called the UCA podcast. It's the one that's officially named UCA. And I deliberately connect with the folks from all around the world who are either isolated or who have some connections. Like I've talked with you guys. I interviewed you in one of the episodes way back 2 years ago. And I'm trying to help people find resources, help these isolated folks know that they're not alone. And it's been amazing. And my hope is that folks know and learn about groups like the Christadelphians, folks like the groups like I have in the States and other places around the world. They need to know that they exist. They need to know that there are entire organizations who function like this, because so many people just go around to a couple churches in their city and think like, I'll never have a home. I'll never find fellowship. In fact, that is not true.
Yeah, it's a really good work, a really good service. It's kind of like making sure that we're visible, that you're visible, that our churches and our groups are sort of waving a flag and saying, look, here we are. And your podcast, Mark, works really well like that, and I'm sure the conferences in the US have worked really well like that as well, and I'm pretty sure this UK and Europe conferences, you're branding it a little bit like you're into Europe, because I'm pretty sure you're going to have some people come from across Europe, which is great.
One of the team that's putting the conference together is Philippus here from Germany, and he was a guest on my podcast over a year ago, and he's just still been involved. He connected up with them, and he's helping build the conference and get it working. So there are folks, I think when I looked at the numbers, I think we're approaching around 200 members of the UCA. And when I say member of the UCA, they're just people who've put their spots on the map on our website. There's approaching 200 people in overall the area of Europe. And I would guess quite a few of those people will be happy to attend because, again, these might be the isolated folks who have not yet met others. And now it's just basically right there in their backyard. A train ride away for most of you.
So all our normal contributors are Christadelphians. Paul and I are Christadelphians, and that's kind of deliberate. We're trying to show or trying to bring together that existing body of understanding and faith and show that in our podcast. But what you've already shared, Mark, is how much commonality there is with you and with an unknown number of many people all around. And it's really good for us to look out and see and be there to say, how can we help? Maybe Dale, maybe turn to you as well. I've listened a lot to your own podcast, Trinity's podcast, which I've certainly found really, really helpful. And maybe for our listeners, can you describe your journey in theology and sort of how you got interested very much into the Trinity and where that led?
Sure. I basically grew up in mainstream evangelicalism in Dallas, Texas. And like a lot of kids, a lot of young men, I had an interest in apologetics. I wouldn't say I thought hardly at all about the Trinity or the deity of Christ in any detail, but I just said, the Bible obviously teaches these things. It's only the wacky cultists who deny them. I just assumed that kind of growing up. But then I spent all of the 90s. I started in 89 in college, and I finished my PhD in the year 2000. I got 3 degrees in philosophy, and that trained me in analytic philosophy and in the history of philosophy. And toward the end of that time, I kind of rolled up my sleeves, okay, this Trinity thing, this is what all Christians believe, this is implied by the Bible. Well, it must be true, so then it can't be really contradictory, so let's try to figure this out. Well, I started doing some reading and found out that there were non-Trinitarian Unitarian Christians in history. That was very interesting. And then when I looked at what the current day Christian philosophers were doing, they came out with, 74 different Trinity theories, basically. I exaggerate slightly, but they all had different problems. And to make a long story short, this pushed me to go back and examine the Bible. And much to my shock, I found that not only does the Bible not support these theories, but actually the Bible contradicts these theories because according to the Bible, the one true God just is the Father himself. And so then I became a Trinitarian, kind of kicking and screaming, realizing it was not a very cool thing to do. Got slightly marginalized by my Christian philosophy peers, but I was a philosophy professor for about 18 years until I just decided to leave academia for numerous reasons. And I'm really blessed and privileged now to be able to spend some time working with the UCA and just continuing to slowly produce podcasts and other things and basically try to help the cause of Reformation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Dale, how life has kind of led you into a depth of study in one particular area, which certainly is beneficial for many to hear and listen to.
I was like the people that I'm trying now to reach,
Yeah.
I thought this was obvious. All Christians have always believed it. It must make sense somehow. Honestly, I think I had almost never heard of the Christadelphians.
And from my point of view, growing up in the Christadelphian community, Dan's the same, Mark, similar. The concept of God is one, Jesus is the Son of God, the human Messiah, is taught to you from so young, and it's biblically supported, that we don't necessarily think that deeply about the complexities of the Trinitarian theologies that are out there. And it's actually really quite eye-opening.
Well, it's a blessing to be in that position.
To understand all the shades of those theories and so much variety in there and diversity to think about why people have got to particular conclusions.
Yeah. All the disagreement and the clashing views are hidden by orthodox language. mainstream Christianity since the year 381 has basically enforced a set of terms and sentences that you must nod your head to. But even back then, they didn't all agree on what these meant. So it's really a weird situation that most mainstream Christians go around assuming that these are all important things, but they don't really know quite what they are. And then the scholars, the intellectuals, when they try to figure them out, they come out with all these different things. And honestly, you're better off just with the Bible. There's one God, the Father, and then there's Jesus, and he's the human Messiah.
Yeah, it is how I found your podcast helpful, though, Dale. But because, like Paul said, we have that assumption it's biblically supported. We don't look into it in much detail, but it's extremely helpful just to hear all those different things and background and all that kind of scholarly discussion, which, you know, isn't essential for us to delve into, but it's useful to hear those sorts of things rather than just, you know, being stuck in my own little echo chamber.
Yeah, when I started out writing on this topic and researching this topic, I was focused more on basically Christian philosophers' attempts to make sense of these things, but I've gone more and more into the history and more back to the Bible, and those are the things that are really devastating to the Orthodox positions. Because the Bible really poorly fits these speculations. And the history is kind of shocking how late these things come along. And that's a bit of what I'm talking about at the conference.
Yeah, and I think Tom Gaston's dynamic Marcionism is rooted in that history as well.
It's an absolute game changer. Great book.
And, you know, we sit in a particular point on the theological spectrum, if you like, and it's just really useful to get an understanding of how the kind of river of development of theological positions and ideas has unfolded over the last 2,000 years, and just understand where we are in that and how to respond to the alternative positions that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and I mean, another aspect of history that I think is underexplored is how come Reformation didn't already successfully totally address this already? What happened?
Yeah.
There's no simple answer to that, unfortunately.
And I mean, for me, it gets particularly interesting when it's in its impact on the work of Jesus, the atonement. How is it that human beings are reconciled to God? And the alternative views of that around substitution and so on that emerge in deity. So
that's a tough area of theology, and Orthodoxy doesn't even really exactly have one position there.
No. So before we kind of dive deep into some atonement rabbit hole or something, perhaps we'll just come. So that's your podcast, Dale, which is the Trinities podcast. So go and check that out. But Mark, you've already mentioned that you have a podcast as well, the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, which I've also listened to. It seems very much to focus on the people that have travelled that journey from Trinitarian, from mainstream Christianity into exploring the one God and their experiences of how they've been treated by their previous churches or how they've been searching, and of their great personal testimonies, personal stories. Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, having grown up in the Church of God General Conference as a Unitarian, I had missed out on these stories. And I really find listening to somebody tell their life or their experience as a story to be fascinating. Those are my favorite kinds of podcasts. So when the first UCA conference, the in-person conference got canceled, we were trying to figure, well, what will we do? Because we were expecting to at least have 7 great videos of theological presentations that would be available. I was a DJ for a couple of years, but that was all. It was on actual radio, the things that have antennas and you tune in your car. People in the internet age have to think really hard, like, wait, what is that? It's
wireless, I think we used to call them.
Yeah, the original wireless. So we started the UCA podcast at that time. They said, Mark, the board suggested that I do this. They talked with me and said, do you want to do something with the podcast for the UCA? And I thought at first that would be very narrow. Like, well, it's not even one particular group. It's not a denomination, because of course the UCA is not a denomination. All we really are is a single issue advocacy group with a Yellow Pages or White Pages networking tool. That's really all it is. Yellow Pages in the United States. I don't know if you Brits have.
It's Yellow Pages in the UK as well.
Okay, great. That's
well, it's just about died out.
Yeah, that's another historical relic.
Yeah.
But I mean, since the UCA is really an advocacy group, we don't have a denomination, we don't have churches, we don't have this broad statement of faith. We really are, in one way, an eclectic variety of people who are just using the tool to connect. But at the same time, since it is a narrow focus, I was like, well, what would a podcast like that be? Well, then I started meeting the people and realized, oh my goodness, there's plenty of content. And you might think that, well, Mark's typical episode is, tell me how you became a Unitarian Christian. And then they tell their story. And in fact, that's not what I do at all. I usually take an element from their story that is interesting. And sometimes the Unitarian aspect of it, how their faith played into it, is very minor. It provides the nuance so that you can maybe see how that might have directed them at that moment. But I've got stories of people who couldn't get a job because they were handed a statement of faith, and it said in the statement, well, this is what you believe. I have an upcoming episode that's going to be about folks going to get a master's degree or a PhD, and they go to university that won't give them their degree because they can't sign the statement of faith. Maybe they were able to sign it when they started, but they changed their view along the way, and now the university won't offer that degree. So the podcast ends up being very broad and sometimes practical, talking about resources. And, I want these folks to know, first, they're not alone. And second, I want them to actually meet real people with real stories they can feel a sense of connection to.
Yeah.
I've had a few that were specifically about their transition into Unitarian view out of a Trinitarian view. The very first guest is one that's very beloved, Hildy Chandler. It's a 3-episode part where she just lays out the whole story. Her son is Keegan Chandler, who wrote The God of Jesus. So he's been known in the Unitarian circles. Well, this is the story of him sitting down with his mother and his mother discovering that her son's a heretic. And it's just fascinating because it's done as a story. And quite a few people have enjoyed her story.
Yeah, I think those personal testimonies and personal stories are really powerful ways of bringing people to the gospel generally, let alone this particular issue. Really.
Yeah, this is Dale. I'm a massive fan of Mark's podcast, and the laughing and crying quotient is very high for his episodes for me.
Yeah, it is
Thanks,
very
Dale.
good. Yeah. Let's sort of bring our thoughts back to the conference then in the UK. So I've already mentioned this is a European thing. We're thinking big in that sense. Do you have...
Yeah.
Have you got a sense of how many people are interested in the conference?
As of right now, I know we're expecting it to surpass 50 people. And
Great, okay.
A lot of people join in kind of at the last month. And there are some folks who have said they're coming and they haven't even registered yet. So, I'd love to see 70 or 80 folks there.
Yeah,
but that's a really good sized group because you can meet everybody in a size of group like that.
I agree, yeah. It must be hard to know. Probably a complete unknown adventure, isn't it? So it's well done to all the organisers for putting it together. I'm really looking forward to being part of that kind of warm welcome to people travelling from maybe from Europe to the conference, which I don't think we've not actually mentioned where this is yet or when it is. So we probably ought to say that. So we're in Windsor, aren't we? It's going to be Windsor, so close to London.
Yes.
And what are the dates? It's at the end of July, 20-something.
I've got it here. 25th of July, 25th to the 27th of July.
Thursday night, the 25th to the 27th.
Great, yeah.
And there's some activities on the Sunday afterwards as well. We're going to go down to Speaker's Corner, and there'll be some folks going to...
Yeah, excellent. And, of course, there's the regular Christadelphian activities that are going on, kind of either side of that. I'm sure people coming along would be welcome to, come along and meet us and see us at different churches nearby, or maybe if you're travelling around in different parts of the UK as well as coming just to Windsor.
Yeah, and I think back to Dale's comment that he didn't even know there were Christadelphians. It's easy when you're in it, like when it's the water that you swim through. If you're a fish in the water, you don't even think about water. And I and you guys, we were just in it for years. And this is a chance. The UCA gives you all a chance and gives us a chance to meet people further out and for them to meet us.
Windsor is a beautiful part of London, actually. I presume it's not far from Windsor Castle.
Yeah, very.
One of the
the
British royal family's residences. So you're right in the heart of the British establishment with its Church of England. That's fantastic. And I guess for people coming from Europe, it's not that far from Heathrow Airport, and you can get on the train into King's Cross, I think it is. So I'm thinking practical arrangements now.
Yeah. Our website, UnitarianChristianAlliance.org, has an events menu, and there's a link there for the UCA conferences. And that'll describe the one in the United States, which is in October. Yeah. And it has the link to the conference for the UK. It includes an entire schedule, so you can scroll through and see the activities. And it's being regularly updated as we clarify some things. Yeah. So you can see the whole plan, as well as click register and sign up. Okay,
so there it is, UnitarianChristianAlliance.org, and look on the events page. Everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Perfect. So there's a couple of things I think it would be worth, while you're with us, to explore perhaps a little bit more broadly about the progress of Unitarianism, biblical Unitarianism, if you like, and where is it going? And maybe just thinking a bit more broadly, when you talk to Christians generally and start to get into the subject of this Trinity concept, how do you find that reaching out to mainstream Christians and getting into that? What's the sort of reaction? How do you get into that conversation? I remember seeing a survey not long ago of American views of their beliefs about God. And in the answers that they gave, it was pretty clear that many Americans that would call themselves Christians don't really hold a view of the Trinity that is anywhere like the Orthodox. And many of them sound much more sensible, like Jesus is the Son of God, rather than God the Son. So is there a rich vein or field of opportunity there for Unitarians to be reaching into and preaching into?
There is a big opportunity. I think the status quo is that most Trinitarians are scared and avoidant of the whole topic. There is a percentage of Christians sitting in officially Trinitarian churches that are sitting there thinking Unitarian thoughts. And the reason is because they read the New Testament. And what's more common is you read the New Testament and God is the Father and Jesus is someone else, but then you also kind of think Jesus is God. You're not sure how you can put it all together. The real strident Trinity defenders are incredibly rare. It's just a few loudmouth apologists and a few scholars, really. I think if you can establish common ground with Scripture with your average Trinitarian, there's a very interesting conversation there, because there's a lot of fundamental assumptions that people are not necessarily very willing to challenge, like how could Jesus atone for our sins unless he's God? Stuff like that. Wouldn't God be selfish and lonely somehow if he's only one person?
And so, apart from the academics and the diehards, you're up against apathy.
Yeah, most of the academics don't take it seriously. At least in the U.S., at the seminary level, Trinitarians deliberately do not talk about our view, and they just exclude it from the conversation and just kind of relegate it to the mental category of dealing with cults. And that is starting to crack because they can't hide this information anymore. The arguments and the evidence is just all out there. And so, you're more inquiring, more curious sort of Christian who expects reality to make sense is figuring out this left and right, on their own, but with assistance from the Bible feed or stuff done by Sean Finnegan or Keegan Chandler or some of my stuff. And, part of the impetus for the UCA was we felt a sense of responsibility. And this may be a bigger problem in the U.S., I'm not sure, because it's such a huge country that, as soon as people would get convinced, they would say, okay, where do you go to church? Well, we tell them that, but then there isn't one of those near them. So, look, we don't want them to just be lone wolves and kind of slowly drift away from following Christ. We don't want them to have to sit in the back pew of their Trinitarian church being unhappy. We want them to be able to find each other and maybe start new churches or find out about the Christadelphians or the Church of God General Conference, etc.
I think that's really important, actually, isn't it? Because the Trinity and the understanding of God is an extremely important thing. But actually, what you've just said, these people need to follow Christ, and if they've not got people around them, then they're going to struggle with that, aren't they? Because discipleship is about being together, is about being in church, isn't it? And so actually, one way of looking at, say, the UCA or the work that you guys get involved in sometimes can be a little bit like, oh, all you do is concentrate on the Trinity. All you're doing is banging on about that. But I'm sure, and maybe you could just elaborate a bit more, how do you balance that with the rest of the scriptures, the rest of discipleship?
The UCA has a particular problem of a sampling bias. If you come to a UCA conference or you go to the UCA YouTube channel, you might think that's all we talk about. But we all,
Yeah.
put down our UCA hats and go back and fellowship in our home churches. Dale plays music. I play music. We have a fellowship. And the UCA is deliberately narrow. We actually avoid the other sides of it, the other aspects of it. Even at our conferences, the UCA conferences, we don't put on worship services and music. And we deliberately do that because people are coming from so many backgrounds that we don't want them to feel uncomfortable. And I know that it makes a certain subset of them wish that they could have had like a full-blown church experience. And it's because they're desperate for that. They really want that connection. So what we do instead of doing all of that in the UCA is we just direct them to people who have groups.
You've created a deliberate holding lobby, haven't you? A reception desk. Which,
we wanted the conferences to be a natural landing place for these seekers that have figured this out. And if they just, find the Christadelphians and go off and serve God in that way, then, mission accomplished. They don't have to stay with the UCA.
Yeah.
We'll still be there for the next batch that comes in.
To your question about how has it been interacting now? What is happening in the world today? One of the advantages that we had by doing the UCA was that we were getting people from multiple groups and multiple backgrounds. And I think this year specifically, and it's been building up over the years, but I think we're reaching a point of critical mass where the evangelicals and the other groups, they have to talk about this now. It was so much easier when we remained small groups who had, just a little website here and a couple YouTube videos. Well, now it just seems like us Unitarian Christians are everywhere. And we're always talking and we're popping up in the comments on other people's videos. We've got to a point where you can't really ignore it anymore. And that was pretty significant last year when this pressure was manifested when James White finally agreed to a debate with Dale Tuggy earlier this year.
Yeah, and not only are we popping up everywhere, but it's clear that, it's not a cult. There is no one person in charge. There is no one group. There's differences between the different sorts of Unitarian Christians. Yeah. So, we do feel like it's getting some traction, and it'll get to the point where the seminary people and the apologists feel that they have to address it. And when they have to address it, then all of a sudden everybody will be hearing our arguments, which are stronger than the Trinitarians' arguments.
Okay, we're kind of probably approaching to needing to wrap this up. It's been really good. This isn't in what I sent you, but I wondered if we could do a few quick fire questions just to see how you go.
Yeah.
So, Dale, what's the best place to visit in the USA?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one.
So you need to tempt me over.
Yellowstone or Yosemite National Parks, probably.
Cool. Okay.
Oh, excellent. I'm going there this summer.
Okay, great. So, Mark, I think you're spending a little bit of time in the UK and possibly Ireland as well. What are you most looking forward to seeing?
Well, I've decided to narrow my trip to just stay in England because I don't have enough time to do a lot of traveling. But I'm going to be going over to, I always want to say Muggles, because whenever I hear somebody in an English accent, I think Harry Potter. It's not, it's
The Mumbles, do you mean?
The Mumbles. The Mumbles.
As in South Wales.
Yeah. I'm staying down there. I'm staying there for a few days. I'm going to just relax. Karen and I, my wife, we're celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary, and we decided for a less stressful trip. Not a lot of traveling and whatever, but more peaceful and relaxing.
Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Well, you have to go to Rosilly Beach and Worm's Head, which is just the other side of the Gower Peninsula. It's excellent. Okay.
I heard it's better than the name.
It's stunning, actually. So you need to Google that. It is. Yeah. Worm's Head, Gower Peninsula. There you go. Cool. Right, Dale, a question for you. What's your favourite Bible Feed podcast episode?
Oh, man. Possibly your interview with Tom Gaston.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Just making sure you're listening to us, that's all. Mark, what's one of your all-time favourite Christian hymns or worship songs?
I love A Mighty Fortress Is Our God.
Okay, right, nearly finished. Dale, what's one of the best books you've read? Leaving aside the Bible, let's put that to one side. Anything other than that?
The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard, hands down. One of the greatest Christian books ever written.
Yeah, okay. I think Tim Mackey of Bible Project fame is very big Dallas Willard fan, so...
The heart of it is an exposition of the Sermon on the Mount, and it's incredibly illuminating in that respect. It's deep in every way. I've read it multiple times.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that reading list is just getting longer.
Yeah. Another audiobook. Yeah. Mark, what's the best thing a church can do to make someone new feel welcome?
Want them to be there. And that sounds so simple, but in groups that exist and have been around for a long time, outsiders look different. They might talk different. And it's easy to feel like they're disrupting what's happening in the church. They're going to come in and they're going to ask awkward questions. They're going to not like the same things we like. And it's easy for them. And I know this because I talk to the people who are isolated and trying to find churches. It's easy to go into a church and feel like, I don't think they want me here. And I think that's just terrible because, these folks are looking for Christ and we are Christ's representatives on this earth.
Super. Yeah, that's good.
That's a really great answer. I think we're out of time. So I just say thank you to both of you for giving your time to this and this conversation and joining us on this, telling us about the Unitarian Christian Alliance and in particular about the event that's coming up on the 25th of July, Thursday the 25th of July to the 27th in Windsor, London, UK, with invitations extending to the whole of the continent of Europe as well. So and everything you need to know about that event you can find on UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. So thank you to you both, and God willing, we'll see you in person at the event, or we'll certainly be hearing from you on one of our podcasts.
Well, I look forward to meeting you, and I appreciate having us on.
We're looking forward to meeting you and some Bible Feed listeners.
You've been listening to the Bible Feed podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're always keen to hear what you think, hear your questions, or subjects you'd like us to discuss. Get in touch with us on our Facebook page or send a message from our webpage at biblefeed.org and be part of the journey.